recorded today's episode a couple weeks ago already when I was thinking about the meaning of fulfillment and enrichment in the context of living with dogs. But I talked to Sue Alexander the other day, and I want to add an intro to this episode. Some of what came up in this conversation seems so relevant to my thoughts in this episode. So, Sue is about to start a new cohort for her Introduction to Professional Dog Training course. We talked about this a little bit since I'm always curious about how my colleagues run courses. Sue ended up giving me access to last year's materials so I could take a peek. And wow! If you're thinking about a career change to professional dog training and you want to err on the side of the humane hierarchy, both your lead trainers, Sue herself, and the equally amazing Laura Harper are credentialed with the IAABC, which requires them to adhere to the humane hierarchy. If that's your jam, this is probably, of all the courses out there, the most complete and most value for your money one. One other thing that stood out to me as I looked at the first chapters is its unique starting point. It starts with ethics and finding your personal morals when it comes to dog training. I love that approach, and I haven't seen another one like it. Also, you'll never be asked to only train in one particular way or to sign away your soul. Sue and Laura ask you to think for yourself and find your own values rather than imitating theirs. That's very different than the majority of well-known dog training professional courses out there these days. What I wanted to say, the thing that is relevant to this podcast episode, is that there's a video lecture where Laura talks about the 3-circle model of animal welfare. I hadn't heard of this model before, but I love the way Laura uses it to inspire you to think about both your own goals and to understand rather than judge your colleagues who may work differently. It's made up of, surprise, 3 overlapping circles. One is called natural living, one is called affective states, and one is called biological functioning. They overlap in the middle. Basically, in an ideal world, a dog would be able to live naturally, however you want to define that, be physically and mentally healthy, and feel good and content, happy. You get the idea. Different trainers will often consider one of the 3 circles more important than the other 2. That makes sense. I believe we all have preferences that are based on our personal values rather than on dogs. In the episode I'm about to share with you, you'll hear my own heavy bias towards one of these circles, the so-called natural life one. I don't like the name natural life. It seems vague. What does natural mean? But it is 100% the circle I come down on, and strongly so. There's a saying that's common in German, der einfache Zweig ist dem Vogel lieber als der goldene Käfig. It's probably not originally German, but it has become a German idiom. Maybe you've got it in English as well. It literally translates to, the bird prefers a simple tree branch over a golden cage. I remember first consciously hearing this as a child and immediately relating to it. It's still a huge part of my worldview. I constantly choose tree branches over golden cages. It's also why my philosophy about living with dogs comes down so heavy on providing dogs with the greatest possible freedom while also respecting the boundaries of others. Anyways, I could record a whole other episode about this, and maybe I will, but I'll stop for now. If you want to participate in discussions about this as well as many more dog-centric topics while learning about dog training, check out Sue's course at thedogtrainerscrucible.thinkific.com/courses/IPDT-2025. I'll put the link in the show notes. Oh, and there's one more housekeeping thing. I myself want to learn more about the parts that I haven't much relied on in the past. I want to learn about humane boundary setting/punishment and negative reinforcement in dog training. Since I also need to find a way to boost my income a little after leaving FDSA, I have, even though I still hate paywalls, begrudgingly made a Patreon account where I'll share everything I learn about tools, boundary setting, and ways of training dogs I haven't traditionally engaged in. The first videos are all about how e-collars can be used or misused, and there are no dogs in them, only voluntarily participating human friends who I gave an e-collar to and asked to train me, without much of an explanation. I just released the 3rd one. It's good for laughs. Join to find out how it's going, or join my anti-Patreon at adventuredogsanarchy.com/support. The anti-Patreon all goes towards my time making free, useful resources available to anyone. So they are about things I know and teach about. The Patreon page is about things I'm still learning about myself and couldn't yet provide paid instruction for. There, you'll help me continue to learn more, you'll see me get electroshocks from my friends, you'll get, for now, great entertainment value, and you'll be paying for me to edit videos and explanations for you as I think and work through what I'm learning about humans, dogs, behavior, and life. Dog content is coming soon, but I wanted to start with human-on-human experiments and games. It's on patreon.com/adventuredogs. But now, finally, onto the actual episode. That prologue ended up quite a bit longer than expected. I've been thinking about the difference between enrichment and fulfillment. As humans, we typically strive for finding a fulfilled life. I have yet to meet a human who tells me that their life is very enriching or asks me whether I find my own life sufficiently enriching. However, when it comes to our dogs, these days, we constantly talk about this concept of enrichment. I believe it originates from zoo animals. So zoo animals probably do not have a very fulfilling life because they are confined to small enclosures, or even the largest possible enclosures are still nothing compared to what their life would look like in the wild. Because these zoo animals were lacking the possibility to have a fulfilled life, people came up with enrichment for them. The poor or tolerable life quality was being enriched artificially by means of adding food toys, for example. I think it is also possible to say that we use certain additives to enrich food products that we humans consume. For example, milk is sometimes enriched with extra calcium. The idea here seems to be that something is lacking in the product and we add it on artificially in order to make the thing better than it would otherwise be. That doesn't mean it makes it as good as if it was the real thing, but it is better than if it was lacking that thing. In the example with the zoo animals, I totally agree. I assume that an enriched life, a life that has food toys in it, for example, is probably more interesting than a life without food toys when you're constrained to a relatively small space. In the life that you were actually meant to be living, you would have thousands of hectares of space to explore, which you just don't have in a zoo. But anyway, so the interesting thing is when that came into the dog world, I think that's where it came from initially. Just like clicker training came from marine animal training initially. So when it came into the dog world, I think it first started out as like an interesting curiosity, but over time now, it has turned into this thing that everyone considers extremely important, right? So you need to do all these enrichment activities. There are Facebook groups and online classes and courses and books about the topic of enrichment. There are lots of enrichment toys that you can buy, from the Kong to some like made out of real wood Nina Ottoson mental stimulation something food toy. And then there are also all those do-it-yourself enrichment activities where you use cardboard or cups or egg cartons and you feed your dog out of those. It is mostly food toys. Recently, I've been thinking about this more. I thought about how I rely on feeding out of Kongs and stuff like that, mostly when I live in apartments. When I grew up and the dogs had a yard, we didn't do that. Or when the dogs were free roaming, like in my grandmother's case, we didn't do that. And I think those dogs had fulfilled lives. They had a lot of space, lots of space to explore, and we went on lots of adventures with them. We took them everywhere. They went running and biking with us. Even when we didn't, they had not only a house, but also a large yard, or in the case of my grandmother's dogs, they had a house and then an entire farm that wasn't fenced, so they could really roam and chase and kill rodents, or hang out with anyone who was working on the farm. It was just never boring. That's not the life my dogs have when they're in an apartment, right? So when they're in an apartment, when they're confined to that small, boring apartment, I do a lot more training activities and I feed out of food toys, sometimes exclusively. Because by living in an apartment, I'm definitely putting my dog in the zoo animal situation where they're confined. Even if I go on walks and hikes, for the majority of their waking hours, they will be confined in these small spaces. And I do think it is beneficial to them to give them something to do, to keep them a little bit busy. Eating out of a bowl is boring, right? Eating out of a Kong wobbler takes longer and is, I think, slightly more interesting. When I'm observing my dogs, there is, of course, a little bit of frustration that the food doesn't all come out at once, but I also feel like they're having a good time bouncing on that Kong and making it make noises and trying to pick it up and throwing it around. I think that is a good activity for any dog who lives a confined life and any animal who lives a confined life. I assume that if I was in some sort of prison cell, I would also appreciate enrichment rather than food that is just on a plate. I would probably enjoy learning to eat soup with chopsticks or something like that, because it would help me kill the time. And I'm assuming those prison programs where prisoners are doing really mundane and boring activities like putting stamps on letters or whatever are probably beneficial because they are a break from the mundane prison environment. Like, they give people something to do, which is better than not having anything to do, which does not mean that that prisoner would not rather be free. What has happened in the dog training industry is, I believe, one, marketing and the market has exploited this enrichment idea by means of equating it with you're a good dog owner if you use these enrichment things. And by the way, the only enrichment toys that, in my opinion, are worth buying are Kong wobblers and Kong-like food toys where you put in frozen food. There's a couple of different options. I like the Kong. The West Paw Topple is very easy in comparison, and all my dogs have been really fast with it, so that's, in my opinion, for my dogs, not worth the money. I like something called the Squirrel Dude, which is a food toy that's like a Kong, but it is more difficult because it has these little flaps in the opening that make it harder to get out food. And I would freeze food. But just as much you could feed raw meat bones, and those may be at least as desirable as Kongs. Everything else, like things with little drawers or things that the dog has to make spin, those are expensive. And then once the dog has figured out how it works, they're just so fast that it is not a mental challenge anymore. It's a mental challenge the first time. Then it just gets boring. So I personally think that's a waste. Instead of that, I would just recycle my recycling, right? I would upcycle my recycling. I would put something in a egg carton or in a cardboard box and close that and make things interesting that way. And I believe that is enriching for animals who are confined to small spaces. And that includes dogs living in apartments, and it also includes shelter dogs, dogs living at rehoming organizations in small kennels, or dogs having to stay at the vets overnight and stuff like that. But that is enrichment of a life that is not rich in and of itself. That's why it needs to be enriched. The ideal we should be striving for, in my opinion, is a life that is rich in and of itself, so it doesn't need that enrichment. For me, ways to do that are inseparably linked with the concept of freedom. Freedom of movement, freedom to explore. So that means being off leash, getting to run through the woods like maniacs, if that's your dog's jam, right? If they'd rather slowly sniffy walk through the woods and inspect every leaf of grass, that is just as good. Whatever stuffs your dog's Kong. The more freedom a dog has, the less enrichment I believe they need. Because the world itself, it is filled with enrichment. And the reason that those of us humans who are not in prison don't yearn to eat out of food toys, and there is no food toy market for humans who are not in prison, there isn't one for humans in prison either, as far as I know, but maybe that's an untapped market. So that reason is, I believe, entirely because we are free to move through the world, and the world is inherently a rich place that's filled with lots of different experiences and sights and sounds and smells. We can walk along a street if we're in a city and go in a shop and browse a bookstore. We can window shop. We can buy an ice cream cone at a corner. We can talk to the taco person or to the bartender or whatever we like to do. We can go on a run whenever we feel like it. We can go on a nature walk anytime we want to. We can go swimming. We can ride a bike. We can drive a car. We can watch TV, or we can sit at the park and watch the world go by. We can attend a Zumba class. We can learn to play the piano. We are free to do all these things. That's what makes life interesting. We are free to have conversations and make new friends. We are free to date and build the kind of relationships that are right for us. Those are different for every person. And I'm just getting pulled over by a police person. That sucks. Alright, we are back after I got pulled over by the police person. It's a different day today. I am driving to Los Dinamos to have fun with my dogs out in the wild, and I'm gonna continue recording what I started the last time and then got rudely interrupted by a police person. I just realized I had defined enrichment, but I hadn't actually defined a fulfilled life. But to me, those are two very different things. A fulfilled life, to me, is a life where you have as much agency over the outcomes in your environment as possible. If you live a life where you do the things you love doing 80% of the time, that is probably a fulfilling life. I live a fulfilling life. For me, that includes all the examples I listed. Like, I'm not taking Zumba classes, right? But I walk around the city. I have people to talk to anytime I want. I have good friendships. I go on nature walks with my dogs. I play with my dogs. There is an element of enrichment that I add to my life that I only do when I'm in an apartment, as I am now. That is watching Netflix. Watching Netflix is a behavior that for me goes up when I live in an apartment and goes way down or disappears completely when I have a yard. Because if given the choice, I would much rather do stuff in the yard. If that's mowing the lawn or gardening, I would much rather do that than watch a Netflix show, but I can't currently because I don't have a yard. So I fill that space with Netflix. That's also still okay. I get to choose from lots of different ones, right? So as long as the show is good, I enjoy that too. I would just enjoy having a yard more, so one day I will have one again. But anyways, for me, watching Netflix is enrichment. It is not fulfillment. While gardening and mowing the lawn is most definitely fulfillment in that category. And my dogs currently absolutely eat out of food toys because they're apartment dogs. I still try to keep the fulfilled part of their life as high as possible, because the more fulfilling the life already is, the less enriching you have to make it. By my definition of fulfillment, when we talk about dogs, it means the greatest possible degree of freedom. That is my personal definition. That is definitely not an official definition. I don't think there is an official definition. Your definition can absolutely differ. That's totally fine. That's just my definition that I'm sharing here. For example, my grandmother's dogs, when I was a kid, the ones who were free roaming and lived on a farm, they were 100% having a fulfilling life. They were never bored. They didn't have any issues behaviorally. Dogs can still have behavioral issues, even if they have a fulfilling life. But the probability goes down by a lot, I believe, if the life is fulfilling, rather than having to be enriched. As dog trainers, sometimes we work with clients whose dogs have a very boring life and it is lacking enrichment as well as fulfillment. In that situation, if the person is not able or willing to add true fulfillment to their dog's life, then adding enrichment is definitely better than nothing. I've recommended feeding out of Kongs and cardboard shredding as a hobby and stuff like that to many clients. I've also recommended just taking classes. To me, training dogs is an enrichment activity. It's not fulfillment, because we usually do that for ourselves. I think play for the sake of play is more of a fulfilling activity, because that's something that dogs naturally do. Most dogs, anyways. I can also see that in me and my own dogs. The more confined we are, so when we live in apartments, I train them more because I feel like I need to give that to them so they don't get bored, their needs get met. While when we have a lot of space, I train them less and let them be more dogs. To me, personally, that falls into the category of enrichment rather than fulfillment, but other people may, of course, think otherwise, and that's totally fine. When I'm thinking about fulfillment, in my case, the definition of that being a life that is rich in play and freedom. I believe the best life a dog can have is that of a free roaming dog, because that dog really gets to make their own agenda. The second best life is one where you just provide them with an opportunity to run or go on walks without a leash at least once a day for at least an hour. Well, it depends on the dog, right? So your geriatric dachshund may only need 15 minutes of ambling slowly, while your young Malinois will ideally get 3 hours of that. So ideally, they get to go out and move freely through the world for as long as you possibly can, and that will depend on their age and their health and the type of dog they are. And then I also like to have a little bit of play. In the case of my dogs specifically, right? For example, I have a Malinois, and this breed has been selected to like biting things. So when we play, a lot of that is tug, because I want them to be able to bite things. And tug toys are perfect for that. We play competitive games of tug, And if I do that almost daily, I can just see my dog's eyes brighten up when she gets to do that. And afterwards, there's a certain kind of bliss. She's tired. She just really likes this. Because we live in a city and it takes quite a while to get to places that are naturey, the kind I like best, our daily walks are city walks. So I train my dogs to the degree that they can be off leash in the city, and they are. I think that's pretty enriching to them too, in terms of I observe them and they read the newspaper or check their Facebook feed, and every corner they meet other dogs, they meet people, they jump the little fences that are at parks. They get to chase rodents at the parks where people feed squirrels and pigeons, but then accidentally create a rat problem. For example, one of the things I've been working on lately with my border collie Chai, who really likes chasing, is we go rodent chasing almost daily at one of the parks where there currently is a large rodent population, and that's rats. Eventually, those rats will get poisoned, right? So people usually tolerate them for a while until they don't like the number of rats anymore, and then they'll put out poison, and the rats are going to die a probably painful death. So my pragmatic self thinks that if my dog keeps that population to a lower number, then it takes longer until there will be poison again, and also it's probably a less cruel death to be quickly killed by a dog than by rat poison. That's why I don't have ethical issues with this. Anytime she kills a rat, we play with her favorite ball as a reward. The criterion is kill the rat and bring it back to me. We don't always kill rats, but she always looks for them, and that's something she really, really likes. She's a border collie, and ideally I would give her what she's been bred for, which is herding sheep. I have found one facility that offers that in the vicinity of Mexico City, but it's a between 2 and 3 hour drive, and the prices are out of my reach. I believe that in order to actually get something out of herding, you need to do it at least once a week if you don't have your own stock. I can't afford that. And then there is, in addition, that long driving time. So we found something else to do together, which is rodent hunting, which is part of her daily off-leash walks. Otherwise, they are free on the sidewalks. They know to not step on the street unless released to cross the street, and that works well. I don't worry about the traffic, because as long as there's a sidewalk, they will be off-leash. And if there's no sidewalk, we're not going to walk there. Luckily, we live in a city where there are sidewalks pretty much everywhere. I would not choose to live in a city where there were no sidewalks if I could avoid it. And my dogs, of course, have friends, like the neighbors' dogs, who are out and about, often without their people. They know my dogs know them. They have a social life, and the social life does not only consist of me. It consists of other dogs, so their own species, and also of other humans. My friends who like dogs, so when they come over, my dogs are happy to be part of that. The greatest amount of fulfillment I can give them is the freedom to be out and about off leash, and when we're around our own housing complex, they're always free. They get to run around and do their stuff, and at least once a week I make an effort to actually drive outside and have them have fun and run around in the woods. That's where they have the most fun. At least that's where I have the most fun. That does not mean we forego off-leash walking when we're not out and about. This is my definition of a rich dog life. Obviously, not everyone shares this definition, and there is an element of how risk-averse you are. If you live in a city apartment and the choice is walk your dog off leash or walk them on a leash. My clients don't usually want to walk their dogs off leash in the city because they're afraid of the dog getting hurt, and that is absolutely legitimate, especially if they are not skilled trainers. Of course, dogs can get hit by traffic. Dogs get hit by traffic all the time. I'm not the god of dog trainers, but I'm a good dog trainer. Not perfect, nobody is, but I'm decent, and I have been able to keep my dogs safe off-leash in cities for years. That does not mean it couldn't happen to me. They could absolutely get run over by a car. That is the greatest risk that I am taking with my dogs on a daily basis. Because I have them off-leash around cars, and they are living, breathing beings. There is an element of unpredictability in anything that involves living, breathing beings. So they might get run over by a car. I'm aware of that risk, and I'm opting into that risk because, to me, it seems worth the life quality we gain. So if they have a life that is 6 years long, and they are off-leash every single day, and then they get hit by a car and they die, or if they could have a life that was 14 years long, and they were never off-leash, and never got hit by a car, I personally believe that the 6 years of life being off-leash with the greatest life quality possible is more desirable than the 12 or 14 years where you're never off leash. That seems like a very tragic and sad life to me. And this is me projecting my own personal values and feelings about freedom onto my dogs. I cannot ask the dogs what they would choose. So that's what we all do all the time when we make choices for our dogs, is we project our own beliefs on them. It's another topic for another podcast probably, but that is also like super interesting to me, how different our own beliefs as humans are, and therefore how, as a result of that, the way we treat dogs also varies greatly. Anyways, all of this is to say, freedom for me is a huge part of fulfillment, and I personally prefer freedom over enrichment for my dogs. Now that we live in an apartment, they definitely get both, because apartment life is not as free as I would like it to be. Anytime I don't live in an apartment, the more space we have and the more we can be out and about in nature, the less thought I put into enrichment and training, because I feel like I'm meeting their baseline needs simply by giving them all that freedom. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. And if you like the show, review us on Apple Podcasts. This means a lot. It makes a difference in people finding the show. That's what I've been told. I don't know. I'm not an algorithm person. Also, if you want to support my blogging and my ability to create free resources for other dog trainers and people who have dogs but cannot afford dog training, go to adventuredogsanarchy.com/support, which is like my version of Patreon. All right. Happy training. I'll talk to you all in a month.